Welcome to our channel World of Ghost Souls. If this is your first time visiting, hello, I am David, the owner of this place. Please come in. I will take you to meet the souls. Now, without making you wait any longer, please follow today's story. At the beginning of that new year, while everywhere was filled with spring colors, every family was joyfully welcoming the new year. Mr. Tony's house was covered in a color of mourning. The atmosphere was heartbreakingly sad. It was not raining, but the sky was grey. Spring had come, but there was no sunshine. If there was any, it disappeared very early to make way for dark clouds. At this time, it was only about 7 a.m. in Mr. Tony's three-room tiled roof house. Many relatives were holding a funeral ceremony and then putting the coffin in the coffin of his only daughter, Luna, who had just died on the night of the first day of the new year at the age of 20. Mrs. Sarah's sobbing but heartbreaking sobs rang out continuously from the moment she heard the news of her daughter's death until now. Next to Luna's body, which had been stiff for a long time, lying on the bed, Luna's face was pale, her eyes were half closed. It felt like they were not completely closed yet, giving people a ghostly feeling, as if this girl was just dozing off and not someone who had passed away. Luna's 2 legs and 2 arms were tightly bound to avoid the state of the corpse convulsing and to respect the process of moving and embalming. Luna died from a tragic accident while going on a spring outing. Also, because she died on New Year's Day, it was not until the 3rd day of the new year that Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran held a funeral and burial ceremony for her. The carved coffin, painted in 2 main colors of red and yellow, was brought by a coffin shop and carried by several young men in the family, placing it in the middle of the house. Preparing to welcome Luna to lie in it, a small altar table was set up at the top of the coffin, on which was a portrait of the young girl, followed by a bowl of rice offerings, a peeled boiled egg held by a pair of chopsticks. Outside the yard, a large tent was set up by Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran's family, both to provide shade from the sun and rain for those who came to pay their respects, and to make room for relatives to help them move the offerings and grave for their daughter. The monk from the temple was also invited early to chant sutras and perform a prayer ceremony for Luna. Several members of the octet sat at the bamboo drums next to them, fiddling with their instruments, waiting for the monk to finish reading sutras and then play music as a way to help the family share their sorrow. About 15 minutes after the monk finished his prayers, the representative of the funeral committee for the clan began the funeral ceremony. Each family, committee, and branch had their names read and then received their mourning scarves. The entire scene was filled with sadness and extreme grief. Even though today was the 3rd day of the new year, they were sad because their clan had lost a son, a grandchild, a sister, a younger sibling. They were sad because they felt sorry for the fate of the deceased who had passed away at such a young age. And they were even sadder for those left behind, for Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran, who had to endure the fate of the white-haired, seeing off the young-haired. The heartbreaking sound of trumpets and funeral music began to play, which was also the moment when the ceremony was held for Luna. Inside the room, Mrs. Sarah cried loudly. She threw herself at her daughter's body, as if she didn't want people to carry her daughter and put her in the cold coffin. For several days, this middle-aged woman had no appetite or sleep. She cried a lot. Her eyes were red and swollen. It seemed like she had no more tears to shed. Luna, Luna, why did you leave me like this, Luna? I carried you for 9 months and 10 days, raised you with great difficulty, and now you don't repay me and leave like this, Luna, Luna. Heaven and earth, why do you torture me like this? What crime did my child commit that you took her away like this? Oh God! Mrs. Sarah rushed to hug the people who were carrying her daughter's body. She wanted to stop these people, not allowing them to put her daughter in the cold coffin. Let go of my daughter, you guys. What are you doing? Let go of my daughter, she's just sleeping. You guys, where are you going to take her? Witnessing this scene, everyone was extremely heartbroken, pitying Mrs. Sarah's situation. Even so, they still tried to stop this woman to complete the coffin procedure on time. A young man in the family stood up and said, "Miss, please don't be too sad. Luna died young. Unfortunately, she passed away at the age of 20. It was God's will. Please let us take her to the coffin. Avoid the auspicious hour. After we're done, we'll go out to the fields to dig a grave so we can bury her tomorrow." This person spoke very gently, trying to persuade her. However, Mrs. Sarah seemed not to hear anything. She cried and tried to rush in, even scratching and biting the people who were carrying her daughter's body. There was no other way. Someone had to run to the outer room to call Mr. Tony in so he could reassure his wife. "Yes, uncle, please come in and advise yourself so that we can take the body out for the funeral ceremony. Normally, when someone dies, it only takes 2 days for the body to be buried in peace and beauty, but he has been lying there for 3 days now. We are very heartbroken." Mr. Tony nodded and walked in. His thin, somewhat haggard face could not hide his sadness. Mr. Tony's eyes were also red. However, because reassuring his wife was also the only support for his wife in the face of this painful loss, he tried to hold back his tears and lifted his wife's armpits, helped her out, and calmly spoke. Mrs. Sarah said, "Oh, my child is gone. I'm also very sad. You have to calm down. Now, in this world, there is only you and me. Go out and let your siblings and grandchildren perform the funeral ceremony for your child. Do you still want your child to rest in peace?" Hearing her husband's advice, Mrs. Sarah finally did not rush to the crowd anymore. Very quickly after that, Luna's body was brought to the outer room. The cold coffin was lined with a cloth. Luna's body was placed there. Next, the 4 of them grabbed the 4 corners of the cloth and lifted it up and down 9 times. And finally, they placed the body down. The daily objects that Luna often used were also put in the coffin. The shaman was also invited by Mr. Tony's family, standing at the head of the coffin, and also started to go to the altar to burn incense and perform the funeral ceremony. When finished, all of them lifted the coffin lid. Witnessing this scene, Mrs. Sarah collapsed to the floor. Her sobbing voice rang out again. Gradually, the sobbing became louder, making the neighbors present unable to hold back and burst into tears as well. The coffin lid was closed. Each dry hammer blow sounded as if completely separating Mrs. Sarah from her daughter. From now on, the living and the dead were separated. She would never see her daughter's face again. Mrs. Sarah stretched her body and rushed towards the coffin, but her 2 arms were being held tightly by several relatives so that they could finish hammering the nails. A few minutes later, the coffin lid was closed. Mrs. Sarah was so in pain that she fainted in her husband's arms. The people inside left in a hurry to help Mr. Tony's family with the work, as well as the food, and prepare for the funeral ceremony that took place this afternoon at 1 p.m. Everything went on as usual until 12 o'clock at night, when Mr. Tony's family prepared to perform the Kiku ceremony, also known as the Yetta ceremony. This is a traditional ritual of great significance in sending the deceased to the other world. The coffin in front of Luna's body was carried to the family altar to report to the ancestors that Luna's soul had gone to the other world. At exactly 12 o'clock at night, the coffin was placed with its head facing the altar, its feet facing the door. In the solemn and mournful atmosphere, apart from the gasps of the pallbearers as they had to lift the coffin up and down 3 times, there was no other sound. Outside, the space was dark, except for the dim electric lights coming from the theatre. Everything was plunged into darkness. On the side of the house, the bamboo grove surrounding the house occasionally made rustling sounds. The sound of the wind blowing in gusts made the old bamboo shoots sway, giving people a gloomy and eerie feeling. The coffin had just been placed down when suddenly a cold wind blew in from outside. The whistling sound in the quiet night made everyone in the house get goosebumps. Mrs. Sarah, who was so tired that her husband put her in the bedroom, suddenly shivered from the cold wind. Then a wild cat meowing came from outside, making her open her eyes. Mrs. Sarah jumped up. The window had been blown open by the wind at some point. The dim moonlight shone through the window frame straight into the bedroom. Looking out, Mrs. Sarah saw a very large black cat with its mouth open, meowing. At first, the sound she heard was like a cat, but later, it sounded like a baby crying. It kept ringing in her ears, making her shiver. Mrs. Sarah leaned out and waved her hand to chase the cat away because she was afraid it would run into the coffin in the outer room. She, like many others, believed that if a cat jumped over the coffin of a dead person, the corpse would rise up. After chasing the cat away, Mrs. Sarah got out of bed and walked to the window. Outside, the bamboo was still swaying in the wind, making a whistling sound from time to time. Go, go, go! Only then did Mrs. Sarah chase the cat away. She was about to close the door when she suddenly saw a figure looming in the distance in the bamboo grove behind the garden. She strained her eyes under the dim moonlight and realized it was a young woman holding a baby in her arms. This person was wearing a white outfit, similar to the kind of shroud people often put on corpses. The long hair covered her entire face. Seeing a stranger appear in her garden, thinking that it was a relative who came to help with the funeral, Mrs. Sarah raised her voice and asked, "Who is it? What are you doing out there at night? If you don't go home, both mother and child will get sick." Mrs. Sarah raised her voice and asked, but the white shadow did not answer. Suddenly, the baby in this person's arms started to cry. The cold cry of Luna echoed, sometimes far, sometimes near, as if it came from the underworld. "Be good. I love you. I love you. I love you." The mother kept comforting the baby in her arms. Hearing the voice of this white shadow, Mrs. Sarah was startled. Why did this voice sound so familiar? So familiar. Wasn't this the voice of Luna, her only child, the one lying in that cold coffin? After a few seconds, Mrs. Sarah came back to her senses. Perhaps because she was so heartbroken by her daughter's death, she shouted unconsciously, "Luna, Luna, is that you, Luna? Tell me to come." Mrs. Sarah had just finished speaking when a cold wind blew in. The strong wind made the white figure's burial clothes under the veil flutter, and the long hair that covered her face was also blown away by the wind. Underneath the hair, the pale face without a drop of blood of the woman appeared. It was Luna. Seeing Luna, Mrs. Sarah shouted even louder, "Come here to me. What are you doing standing there? Come here. Come here. It's not cold, my child." Not responding to Mrs. Sarah's words, Luna looked at her mother with sad and sorrowful eyes. Then she turned around and walked away, finally disappearing behind the old bamboo trees swaying in the wind. Leaving behind her was her mother's throat-wrenching screams. Outside, after hearing his wife's screams, Mr. Tony and a few others rushed into the room. He turned on the light switch and walked towards the bed. "Wife, wife, wake up, wake up. What's wrong? Wake up." After about a dozen seconds, Mrs. Sarah woke up. Even though the weather was still cold, her whole body was covered in sweat. She was panting and trying to take a deep breath, then looked at her husband and the others. Seeing his wife awake, Mr. Tony gently asked, "What's wrong? What did you dream about that made you scream so loudly?" Mrs. Sarah did not reply to her husband. As if suddenly remembering something, she rushed to the window, opened it, and looked out towards the bamboo grove. Under the dim moonlight, apart from the bamboo grove still rustling in the wind, Mrs. Sarah could see nothing else. "Oh, you, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you answer when I asked you?" Mr. Tony asked again. Only then did Mrs. Sarah say, "Sir, I saw Luna coming back. She was standing right under the bamboo hedge in the back garden. I called her a few times, but she didn't answer." Mr. Tony sighed. He knew his wife loved her children very much. That's why she was like that. Not only him and Lily, but also him. The love he had for his only daughter was no less than Mrs. Sarah. He didn't cry much, not because he didn't cry, but because he tried to hold back his grief to be a support for his wife. He was afraid that if he collapsed, this family wouldn't know where to go. He comforted his wife. "Our child is gone, Mom. His body is still lying out there. Everyone and I just finished the ancestral ceremony for him. Maybe it's because you miss him so much that you have such a dream. Go back to sleep. Don't wake up early tomorrow to take him to the field." Saying that, Mr. Tony and the group were about to turn away when Mrs. Sarah spoke again. "No, I didn't dream. I clearly saw my child. I also saw him wearing a white burial suit and holding a baby in his arms." When Mrs. Sarah said this, the people in the room silently shook their heads. They all thought, like Mr. Tony, that Mrs. Sarah was so heartbroken over her child's death that she had such a dream. Moreover, Luna was only 20, and she didn't have a husband yet, so how could she have a child? At this moment, a young man approached Mrs. Sarah, who was only about 20 or 21 years old. The young man held her hand and comforted her. Although his eyes were red from crying, they were still dark from fatigue and lack of sleep. This person was Lily, Luna's childhood friend and also her lover. Since receiving the news of Luna's unfortunate death, Lily had always been at Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran's house to stay by her lover's body. Until today, when Mr. Tony's family held the funeral for their daughter, Lily had always helped with many things without resting, only occasionally sitting down to smoke a cigarette and then rushing back to work. Lily and Luna's houses were about 30 or 40 meters apart. The two were only 1 year apart in age, so they could be called peers. Since they were young, the two of them had always stuck together. They went to the same elementary, middle, and high school, and Lily took Luna to and from school. That's why they developed feelings for each other and became a couple. Because Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran's family did not have the means, Luna only finished high school and then went to work. On the contrary, Lily was different. His family tried to support him in his studies, and he is now a student at a famous university in the province. The day Lily went to the province to study, Luna was very sad, but Lily consoled her wholeheartedly, saying that she should try to wait a few years until Lily finished her studies, and then she would come back to her. Not only that, every time she had a chance to visit her hometown, Lily still told Luna that when she finished her studies, he would come back to marry her and take care of her so that she could have a better and happier life. But now, the two people are separated by time. Fate has made it so that the two lovers can never see each other again. Lily held Mrs. Sarah's hand and said, "Auntie, our little Luna unfortunately passed away. Not only you guys, but I am also very heartbroken these past few days. I even thought about following her, but in the end, I stopped. I can't be as cruel as Luna. I can't bear to leave everyone behind and selfishly go find Luna. I still have to take care of both of your old parents, and I have to take care of Luna on your behalf. So Uncle, please be strong. Let's try to overcome this pain together, okay?" Hearing Lily's heartfelt words and seeing the young man's red eyes, everyone was extremely heartbroken. Mr. Tony and Mrs. Sarah couldn't hold back their tears and sobbed. Finally, with Lily's advice, Mrs. Sarah agreed to go to bed to rest a little more so that she could wake up early tomorrow to hold the funeral for her daughter. Advising Mrs. Sarah, the group went out to the outer room. The people who had just helped Mr. Tony with his daughter's ancestor worship ceremony also left in a hurry. Some went back to rest, some went outside to watch the theatre, some who were addicted to gambling went to the people who were playing cards to kill time until the morning meal was prepared. Seeing everyone leave, Lily also advised Mr. Tony to go into the room to rest. "You've been up all night for the past few nights. We are young people and can still try to endure, but at your age, you will be very tired. If you're not careful to finish taking care of Luna, you will fall ill. Then who will be Mrs. Sarah's support?" Hearing Lily say that, Mr. Tony was very touched. He still wanted to stay with his daughter tonight, but in the end, he still listened to Lily. In his heart, he and his wife had long considered this young man as their child, simply because they both thought that Lily and Luna's marriage was only a matter of time. Mr. Tony did not go to sleep with his wife for fear of waking Mrs. Sarah, so he took a set of blankets and pillows to the bamboo bed outside the theatre to lie down. At this time, in the house, there was only Lily and the coffin inside, which was Luna's cold body. Seeing that the incense on the incense bowl was almost gone, Lily quickly took out 3 sticks from the incense stick, lit them, and inserted the incense into the incense bowl. For some reason, Lily looked at Luna's memorial photo on the altar. Luna rarely took photos, or rather, she didn't have the conditions, because if she wanted to take photos, she had to go all the way to the town. So all of Lily's photos were very clear, and this memorial photo of Luna was also taken from one of the rare photos that Luna took during a trip to the town with her lover. Lily remembered that time Luna had just turned 18. After taking a couple photo together, Lily advised Luna, "Take an ID photo, both, so that when we need to apply for a job later, we can take it out right away, and also for me to put in my wallet. When I miss you, I can take it out and look at it." Hearing her lover say that, Luna blushed and mumbled, "Who gave you that to put in your wallet?" Even so, Luna obediently listened and took a photo. In that photo, Luna smiled brightly. One could see the happiness overflowing in the eyes of that young girl. Her eyes were looking longingly at her lover. However, she did not expect that this beautiful photo would be used by her parents as her own memorial photo. The incense smoke from Luna's incense sticks, the scent of incense for several days, made Lily sneeze. Looking at Luna's memorial photo, for some reason, Lily felt that it was a bit magical. Luna's beautiful smile seemed to exude an indescribable evil. The incense smoke was still rising. Suddenly it stopped rising and instead hovered in front of the photo. They gathered without dissipating, giving people a vague feeling of being lost in the underworld. From inside the coffin, a creaking sound came out, as if the person inside was using his fingernails to scratch the wooden walls. The sound made Lily's hair stand on end, her back shivering, feeling as if someone had poured ice water on him. The creaking sound then grew louder and turned into a rumbling sound, as if the person inside was very angry, angry enough to hit the top of the coffin with his head. Lily's soul was so scared that it was in the clouds, but before he could recover, the 3 incense sticks that Lily had just lit for her lover on the incense burner suddenly burst into flames. Lily was so frightened that she fell backwards. Looking at Luna's portrait, Lily saw the corners of her mouth suddenly curl up into a smile that reached from ear to ear. The cat meowed, the big black cat in front of the window in Mrs. Sarah's room had appeared at some point. It crawled out from under Mr. Tony's altar. The cat walked out with a very dignified appearance. Its thick tail was wagging behind it. Its eyes were blue, then gradually turned red. There were blood vessels in them. It glared at Lily. Its mouth kept making sharp meowing sounds. Suddenly, it rushed to attack Lily, who was sitting on the ground. Lily didn't have time to react, so she could only raise her hands to her head to cover her weak point. The cat pounced on Lily, knocking her back and continuously using its sharp claws to scratch the young man's hand. Not stopping there, it used its sharp teeth to bite until Lily's blood flowed out profusely. Too scared, Lily screamed loudly. From outside, Mr. Tony rushed in again, saw Lily cowering next to her daughter's coffin and calling, so he hurriedly went to call him. "Wake up! Wake up! Wake up, Lily! What's wrong, Lily?" Lily opened her eyes, saw that there was no cat in front of her but Mr. Tony, and was a bit confused. After calming down for a while, he told Mr. Tony that he was just dreaming and that nothing was wrong. Mr. Tony sighed. Maybe Lily was too tired after all. She hadn't had any rest all day yesterday. He secretly thought that his wife was really a bit selfish, Even if she considered Lily as her own child, she shouldn't have done that. Not to mention Lily and Luna hadn't gotten married yet. Now Luna had passed away, and Lily would have to get married and have children later. Thinking so, he looked at the wall clock and saw that it was exactly 3 a.m., only a little over an hour or two left until it was time to do the procedure and take Luna's body to the field. So he advised Lily to take a nap. When the time came, he would wake him up. As for guarding Lily's body, he would do it. At 7:15 a.m., after all the funeral procedures were completed, the group of people began to head straight to the cemetery to bury Luna. There, a deep hole had been dug since noon the day before. The sound of drums and trumpets from the octet resounded, accompanied by the choked cries of Luna's relatives, especially Mrs. Sarah. Walking beside her, Mr. Tony tried to drag each painful step while trying to support his wife, otherwise Mrs. Sarah would fall again at any moment. Among the crowd, Lily also walked silently. Although he was mourning for his lover, in his mind he was thinking about last night. The pain from the wounds scratched by the black cat was still intact. Even when he woke up in the morning, those wounds were still clear. That proved that what Lily had experienced last night was not a dream, but completely real. Luna's ghost had appeared, and perhaps not only Lily, but also Mrs. Sarah had encountered her daughter's ghost. The crowd was still struggling to push the hearse. Occasionally the rusty wheels creaked. The weather was full of spring colors, but the atmosphere here was gloomy and mournful to the point of fear. The hearse was still running straight towards the cemetery when it suddenly stopped. Even though the people pulling the hearse tried their best, they couldn't make it move. This made everyone feel bewildered and somewhat scared. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, strong winds blew, and a downpour that shouldn't have happened this season poured down, drenching the mourners like drowned rats. The heavy rain came unexpectedly, and the hearse didn't move, so the people carrying the flags in front turned their heads to look back. One person seemed anxious and ran over to ask, "What's going on? Why did you stop while you were moving? Hurry up, or the whole grave will be flooded." One person replied, "It's not that we stopped, it's that the hearse didn't move. Even though we used all our strength to push and pull, it wouldn't budge at all. It was as if the person inside the coffin wouldn't move." Hearing this person's words, the other person's face turned pale. "What do you mean the person in the coffin won't move? Isn't Luna dead?" Although he was scared, this person still tried to calm down. He went to the back of the hearse and used all his strength to push it a few times. Only when he felt that the hearse really didn't move did he believe it. People started whispering and gossiping. They thought that the dead person's soul didn't want to leave yet and was still lingering in the mortal world, so he didn't want his body buried. Or maybe the dead person had some grievance and couldn't rest in peace. Mrs. Sarah then started to rush towards the hearse and cried, "Oh, the deep blue sky! Why do you torture me like this? My child is dead, and you still can't give him a peaceful and beautiful grave. Oh, Luna! Oh, Luna! Why did you leave me so soon, Luna?" Witnessing this scene, Mrs. Sarah's family members had to wholeheartedly advise her not to be like this. Then Luna would rest in peace. The coffin had been stopped for more than 10 minutes without moving. The chatter grew louder and louder. The houses on both sides of the road saw the strange thing and looked out anxiously. However, no one dared to come near, partly because it was only the 4th of the new year. Everyone was afraid of bad luck, and partly because in this village the hearse not moving was the first time it had happened. Even though they didn't believe in ghosts or ghosts, what other choice was there? Mr. Tony had to ask a young man to run and invite a shaman to come and test it. When the shaman arrived, he immediately told a few people to prepare 2 large bowls of salt and rice. Taking the 2 bowls of salt and rice, the shaman threw them to both sides of the road, while whispering prayers for the wandering souls here. After throwing all the rice and salt, he lit some incense sticks on Luna's spirit table and muttered prayers. After about 5 minutes, the shaman told the group to try pushing the hearse, and indeed, it finally started to roll. The group continued to hurry to the cemetery to bury Luna. If they left it for too long, the hole dug yesterday would be flooded by the heavy rain. Finally, the coffin containing Luna's body was carefully buried. Until now, Luna has been called a peaceful grave. Her passing has left behind grief for all her relatives in the family. After several long days of hard work taking care of their child's funeral, today, Mr. and Mrs. Tony Tran finally had a good night's sleep. While falling asleep, a few strange images suddenly appeared in his mind. All of them were of Lily. Every single thing that this young man had done at Luna's funeral over the past few days appeared one by one. Everything was so clear, as if Mr. Tony was standing there observing him. While Mr. Tony still didn't understand why he had such a strange dream about Lily, suddenly a familiar voice rang out in his ear. "Dad, Dad, I'm so miserable, Dad." Mr. Tony opened his eyes and woke up, seeing right under his bed a white figure wearing a burial suit, holding a baby in his arms. The white shadow looked at Mr. Tony and cried, looking extremely pitiful. "Luna! Luna! Is that you? Are you coming to visit your parents, Luna? I'm so miserable, Dad. I was killed, so miserable, Dad." The white shadow continued to speak. Its deep and resonant voice seemed to echo from the vast lake. Ah, killed me. And what happened to the child in my arms?" Luna did not answer. She lowered her head, her eyes revealing sadness. Suddenly, the child in Luna's arms raised its head and spoke. "Grandpa, Grandpa, I'm your grandchild. My mother and I were killed by my father. Grandpa." Mr. Tony was stunned, then raised his voice and asked, What's going on? My father is no longer anyone." Although Mr. Tony was asking the child, his eyes were looking straight at Luna. Luna remained the same, still lowering her head, not daring to meet her father's gaze. Finally, she turned and walked away. Luna's figure gradually disappeared into the darkness. "Luna, Luna, my child. Where are you, Luna?" Mr. Tony shouted, but Luna's figure did not appear anymore. On the contrary, at this moment he felt like someone was shaking him. He opened his eyes and realized that it was Mrs. Sarah, and what he had just seen was just a dream. "What's wrong that you're screaming? Did you dream about your child again?" Mr. Tony nodded. "I dreamed about my child. He was wearing a burial suit. His long black hair covered his face. He kept coming back and complaining about his misery. Not only that, he was holding a baby in his arms. The last time I saw him like that too." "Did the stork say anything else? Why are you complaining about your misery? Or is there something we're missing at our child's funeral today?" Mr. Tony shook his head to signal that Luna didn't say anything. He reached for the fan and fanned himself. Even though the early spring weather was still cold, sweat poured down his body like rain. After thinking for a while, Mr. Tony continued. "Luna didn't say anything. When she saw the babies in her arms, she called me Grandpa. She also said that her mother and child were murdered by her father." "What are you talking about? That child is Luna's child." "Nonsense. There's no way. Our Luna hasn't even gotten married yet. So where did she get a child? Moreover, she said that her and her mother were killed by her father. So who is her father? How do I know who her father is? Let's go to sleep. It's almost morning. We have to wake up tomorrow to clean up a few things." Mr. Tony said that and tried to lie down to sleep. Even though he said that, he couldn't close his eyes anymore. The image of his pitiful daughter was still appearing in his mind. After a while, Mrs. Sarah's voice rang out again. "I can't sleep. I just close my eyes and Luna's image keeps appearing." Mr. Tony sighed. "I'm no different from you, and I'm also wondering why I dreamed about Lily." She said. Then Mr. Tony told Mrs. Sarah about his dream about Lily. After listening, Mrs. Sarah suddenly said, "Oh no, did Lily kill Luna? After killing Luna, he felt guilty and came here to help with the housework so wholeheartedly." Mr. Tony shook his head. "Don't blame good people. Lily and Luna were in love. What reason would they have to kill my daughter? My daughter died in an accident. The police have already investigated clearly. But if it wasn't Lily, then who was it? If not, why did Luna tell me in my dream that she was killed, and with so many people, she only let me dream about Lily? Mr. Tony couldn't explain this either, so in the end, he told Mrs. Sarah to try to sleep so he could go to Lily's house tomorrow morning to ask around. Maybe there would be some clues. Lying down for a while until about 5 a.m., Mr. Tony and his wife woke up. The two of them went to the kitchen to cook rice and burn incense to worship their daughter. It was after 6 a.m. when Mr. Tony got ready to go to Lily's house. Before leaving, Mrs. Sarah told him to go there to thank Lily for helping her family with the funeral and invite her to dinner. Mr. Tony nodded in agreement. That was indeed what he was thinking in his heart. Mr. Tony's house and Lily's house were about 30 or 40 meters apart, so it only took him a minute to get there. When he entered the house, Mr. Tony asked Lily's parents where he was, but they said that Lily had gone to the province early because today she had an appointment with a friend to wish the teachers of the subject department a happy new year. Seeing that, Mr. Tony shook his head in frustration and returned home to tell Mrs. Sarah. It was true that what Mrs. Sarah thought was that Luna was brutally murdered by Lily, and the motive for the crime was that Lily had a new lover in the city and no one but him knew about this. When she went to the province to study, Lily was still loyal to Luna. He still thought that after finishing school, he would come back and marry Luna. However, man proposes, God disposes. At the end of last year, Lily met a rich girl. Not only rich, but her father was also the head of a chain of companies in the industry that Lily was studying. If she could marry this girl, Lily's life would turn a new page. However, in order to carry out her desired plan, Lily had to leave Luna, her lover, her childhood friend, who had grown up with her for the past 20 years. So on the occasion of the new year, Lily returned to her hometown and then gave Luna a surprise by saying goodbye to her. However, Luna also gave Lily a surprise, which was that she was more than 2 months pregnant with Lily. Obviously, compared to Luna, Lily was even more surprised. It seemed that because of the child in her belly, Lily would change her mind and not break up with Luna anymore. But no, he still insisted on leaving Luna. Not only that, he also forced her to abort the fetus. Because of that, the two had an argument. Lily was afraid that if Luna refused to abort the baby, he would be in a dilemma. If he married Luna, he would have to live a difficult life, but if he didn't marry Luna, when this matter reached the rich girl, he would lose everything. Until the first day of the new year, Lily had an idea to ask Luna out and then think of a way to kill her. Only then could he fulfill his dream and not be called an ungrateful person by the villagers. Lily and Luna's house was in the mountainous region of the north, located halfway up a pass. To get to the village, they had to go around a road with very gentle slopes on both sides. If they fell down, they would definitely die. So according to the plan, on the evening of the first day of the new year, Lily asked Luna out, but he made an excuse that he couldn't pick her up and told her to drive to the location herself. At that time, Lily would wait nearby when Luna drove by, and he would rush over and push her car down the mountainside. In the end, everything happened as Lily had calculated. Luna died in an accident, and no one noticed anything unusual. Luna's parents didn't want to perform an autopsy on their child's body, so they didn't discover the fetus in her womb. Even if they found out and knew it was Lily's child, they would never think that he had killed his lover and child. And just as Mrs. Sarah thought, because of guilt, and wanting to somewhat reduce her own karma, Lily wholeheartedly helped Mr. and Mrs. Tony arrange Luna's funeral. It seemed that everything would just pass like that. The evildoer would get what he wanted. Man proposes, God disposes, or more correctly, the net of God is vast but difficult to escape. Even if the evildoer escapes the sentence of the law, he cannot escape the sentence of his conscience. That day, on the first week of Luna's death anniversary, Lily's family suddenly received a phone call from the police. They reported that Lily had an accident while driving on the road. He was drunk and crashed into a dump truck parked on the side of the road. The impact was so strong that Lily's head was crushed. She died on the spot. Her bones were broken in many places. Even one leg was completely severed. It could be called a death without a whole body. And that is the end of today's story. Thank you all for listening and following this story. I wonder if you have any feelings about this story or not. Please leave it for David and the team of our channel to know. And now, goodbye and see you again. Good night. See you in the next broadcast.